and welcome to my channel. I'm Mandi Grace, author of 10 young adult novels so far. I watched episode 3 of The Rings of Power last night, and boy do I have thoughts. The first thing I wanted to address was that I did not realize I was like jumping on a bandwagon by posting my review of The Rings of Power. I've thought about reviewing shows and movies and film before, going so far as to write out scripts to film, but then I just never did it. And the fact that I did do it with The Rings of Power was kind of just an accident. Like, it just, I don't know. I was sick, and so my decision making was slightly more impulsive, and basically any anxieties that I have about reviewing film, which is what stopped me from posting like the Marvel reviews that I had written. When I was sick, I was like, I don't even care, and I just posted it. But I didn't realize that was like, it's like a whole thing right now to be reviewing Rings of Power. I understand that now. I have seen episode 3 now, so I have thoughts, which I will get to momentarily, but there's a couple of things I want to address first. I knew there was upheaval in the Tolkien fandom over the Rings of Power before it came out. I'd seen headlines and like thumbnails here on YouTube and various things, but I hadn't like clicked on any of it. I hadn't dived into it to see what people were saying, because I wanted to approach the show with an open mind and form my own opinions and not bring all the negativity with me to my viewing. So I didn't dive into anything that people were saying. I assumed that they had the same sort of wariness that I did, surrounding like the lore and respecting Tolkien and like, I don't know, valid-ish concerns, you know? After I watched the first 2 episodes, I looked into reviews on YouTube, just like typed in Rings of Power reviews, and the first like 4 or 5 reviews I watched that popped up at the top of the page when I searched for Rings of Power reviews was people basically only complaining about the fact that there are people of color in Middle-earth now, and I think that's the dumbest thing I have ever heard. To be fully transparent, I didn't really necessarily notice that there were a whole bunch of people of color in Middle-earth all of a sudden. I noticed that Disa didn't have a beard, but I didn't, people's skin color was not bothering me. I didn't notice that at all. So it never crossed my mind that that would be the big complaint that everyone had. And then I started watching reviews and was like, okay, it's just, because I had searched for reviews, and the first ones that came up, all the ones I was clicking on, were these people being like, oh no, there's people of color in Middle-earth. I typed out a very long, angry rant that I was going to put at the beginning of this video. But I continued to watch more reviews, and actually I did discover that there is a large part of the fandom that, you know, isn't just angry about that, you know, but actually has valid concerns about the Rings of Power, which I appreciate. When I went looking for reviews, it was because I wanted to know what people more well-versed in Tolkien and also more well-spoken than I am, like what they were saying. That's what I wanted. I didn't want all these people being like, ah, no, there's a black elf. Like, that, so stupid. Yeah. And the biggest, like, excuse for the racism was typically something along the lines of like, Tolkien specifically created his mythology for Englishmen, so they're supposed to be white or whatever. And to that I have 2 things to say. 1, what a load of BS, and 2, I don't think it actually detracts from Tolkien's themes and vision and whatever, to have people of color in Middle-earth. As for the number 1 response of mine, like, that's a load of BS. If I was playing an elf in the Rings of Power, nobody would bat an eye. Why is that? I'm American. I'm not English. Tolkien didn't create his mythology for me. Maybe it's because it's not about the fact that he created his mythology for a specific group of people, and it's actually about skin color, so stop lying. Are we gonna go through like all of the actors and actresses in both the Rings of Power and the Hobbit films and the Lord of the Rings trilogy and like weed out all of the ones who aren't specifically English and like harp on them for being in the production at all, because they shouldn't be, right? Because it's only supposed to be this like one set of people that Tolkien created his stuff for. No, is that a little excessive? And the second thing, I don't believe people in color in Middle Earth like detracts from Tolkien, because it doesn't. His entire like thing, like all his stories are wrapped around the idea that the races have issues with each other, and there's a lot of prejudice and bigotry between them, but it's always viewed as a bad thing, and the races have to come together and like work together in spite of their differences in order to solve the problems. And it's when all of the races that don't like each other learn to respect each other and come together that they're able to defeat the bad guys and like make a difference in the world. That's the point of Tolkien's stories. So it doesn't seem like it's detracting from that theme and vision for an adaptation in this day and age to have people of color in it. It feels very in line with Tolkien, to be honest. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on that, and I only brought it up because when I started looking into reviews and what people were saying and whatever, the first thing that came up was all of these people complaining about people of color, and then I found other more well-spoken and less racist individuals who were talking about Tolkien being like, stop telling us we're racist. I was like, okay, valid, but also I can see why people are lumping you all together, because these people are very loud and angry. And they were the first people to pop up when I Googled, or not Googled, YouTube search bar, reviews. So, yeah. Now on to my actual thoughts on episode 3. Since watching the first 2 episodes, which I went into with like nostalgia from what I had been obsessed with in my youth, you know, I wasn't deeply involved in Tolkien recently. Like, I haven't read the books in several years, but I did read them obsessively in high school so many times. So I had like this vague, like, I kind of remember this, and I know that I love it, and then I watched The Rings of Power, right? Since that experience, I have gotten much more involved. Like, I'm diving deep back into the lore again. So I went into episode 3 with more knowledge of the original material, because I've been watching all these reviews, and the racist ones aside, there are some very well-spoken and, like, well-versed Tolkien people talking about The Rings of Power and about Tolkien's works, and, like, I was reacquainted with more of the facts of Tolkien's source material when I went into episode 3, which did, in fact, make it harder to watch. Before I dive into, like, all of my episode 3 thoughts, there are a couple things that I want to address based on what I've been seeing people say in their reviews online. I've seen a lot of people complaining about Arondir's, or however you say his name, I don't know. I'm really bad with names, you guys. Anyway, that's unrelated. Yeah, complaining about his lack of emotion or, like, change in facial expression. And I have 2 things to say to that, and one of them is backstory on myself. But I didn't think he didn't have changes in emotion or facial expression. It's subtle. It's not wild, but it's definitely there, and I could see it. Maybe it's a figment of my imagination, but I could definitely see it. I could hear, you know, changes in his voice pitch, and I could see subtle changes in his facial muscles. So I think y'all just don't pay enough attention. That's what I think. As for the story time on myself, you probably won't know this because on my YouTube channels I'm talking typically, and so I'm more expressive. But a lot of people that I know in my life, even some people I know very well, can't read me, and I don't express all of the emotions that I'm feeling outwardly. When I was young, I used to be very resentful that no one could tell that I was feeling emotions. I was very angry. And then I started this YouTube channel about 6 years ago, and started watching myself excessively as I edit the videos, And I realized that the reason no one could tell that I was upset was because I don't express the emotion. It's not coming out. How are they supposed to know? So one specific story to illustrate this for you. I light candles all the time. Actually, I don't have them lit right now because it's Saturday morning and I was lazy. But I light candles all of the time. And I always use them with my writing and everything. And I ran out of matches one time, and I went to buy some, and I couldn't find any anywhere, and the only ones I could find were in the camping section, but I bought them anyway without really thinking about it. And then I came home and tried to light a candle. And the match was specifically coated so that it would stay lit for like 30 seconds or something, and also not like be blown out by the wind, because it's a camping match and you're supposed to be, you know, like lighting a campfire out in the elements. So it was made to withstand the elements in order to catch the wood on fire. So I tried to light a match right here, and it just kept burning, and blowing it out did absolutely nothing. It was still going, and I was freaking out. I was panicking. I was like, I'm about to burn down the entire house. Like, what? I'm gonna ruin a book. Like, what is happening? This match will not stop burning, and I don't know what to do. And I was freaking out, and I ran outside and like threw it in our fire pit outside. And then I watched the footage of it because I had to edit that video together, and I am perfectly calm. I think I made like a comment, a very casual like, "Oh, you're not going out." And then I walk out of frame. I swear I was running, but apparently no, I was walking out of frame to go take it outside. So yeah, I can see why people don't always know what I'm thinking or feeling, because apparently there's a lot going on inside and less on the outside. So anyway, I guess with that, I sympathize with the reindeer and everyone being like, he doesn't show any emotions. I'm like, don't say that to people. You don't know what's going on inside. Yeah, I guess I feel kinship with him in that regard. And then also there's the fact that I felt like I was seeing changes on his face. They're subtle, I'll give you that. He's not expressive, but I do see changes. And I don't know if part of that is because I am also someone who doesn't always express my emotions in big, loud ways. Which, again, you people probably don't actually know, because I'm typically talking and, like, waving my arms around and, like, wow, I'm expressive. But, yeah, typically I'm not that energetic. And, anyway, yeah, so I don't know if I see things on his face because I am also that way, so, like, I can understand it, or if I'm imagining it because I'm that way and I just assume he is too. Or if it's something to do with, like, being an author, and also just being an empathetic, like, human being. I can easily assign emotions to people's facial expressions. I don't know, you guys. I haven't really analyzed it. All I'm saying is I thought he did have facial expressions, and also I understand why he wouldn't be super expressive, because I'm not always either. Okay, moving on. There were 3 things, I think, in the first 2 episodes that I didn't really talk about, but sort of had to simmer in my brain for a minute, like a day or 2, before I had thoughts about them. So I'm going to discuss those first and then dive into my actual thoughts on episode 3. After the first 2 episodes, I have talked for 20 minutes, camera died. We're back. I need a camera that doesn't turn off after 20 minutes. Anyway, after the first 2 episodes, I was pretty convinced that the stranger was Gandalf. I think they are intentionally giving him mannerisms that make you think of Gandalf. That doesn't necessarily mean he is Gandalf. He could be a different wizard or some other person, or he could even be Sauron, I don't know. But, like, I think they were intentionally making you think of Gandalf because Gandalf is like a character that you immediately think trustworthy, safe, like that sort of thing. Yeah, I do think they're making that, they're doing that on purpose. Now I have episode 3 in my head and I have different thoughts, but like after episode 1 and 2, he seemed like Gandalf, but also we didn't know anything about him. And there was that moment when Nori met him when she was like, ah, the fire's not hot, which called back to the beginning of episode 1 when Galadriel and the elves were like, our torches give no heed because it's so evil here. So there was, like, an obvious, like, hint, I guess, that he's not a good guy, that he could be evil, but then everything he was doing was evoking Gandalf vibes. And I felt after episode 1 and 2 that the writers were doing that on purpose, like, making you feel safe. They're like, if we make you think of Gandalf, you will trust this person, even though this could, like, be Sauron. We don't know. Yeah. After episode 3, I am 99% sure that's Gandalf. And if it's not Gandalf, that's just mean, because they're literally doing everything Gandalf-y. And I think they're doing it on purpose. My other thought after episode 1 and 2, which I don't think I discussed, is the elf and human love story, which wasn't even present in episode 3. But I don't love it. So I like the trope of, like, forbidden love and, like, all of that. It's fun. I enjoy it. But I think it cheapens Beren and Luthien and Aragorn and Arwen and that other couple whose names I will not ever remember. Because they were rare and tragic stories, other than Aragorn and Arwen, who, like, actually end up together. Good for them. But, like, the more elf and human relationships there are, the less special Beren and Luthien and Aragorn and Arwen are. Like, at some point it just becomes commonplace that elves and humans try to be together, you know? Like, I don't know, I feel like it actually detracts from the beauty of the other elf and human relationships. And this one. Also, this one, there wasn't enough on screen for me to care. They barely talked to each other. Yeah, I don't know. They barely talked to each other, and I wasn't invested in their relationship before they were torn apart, so now I'm just kind of like, do I care? I don't know. In the movies, Aragorn and Arwen barely had screen time before the Fellowship left, but they had enough that I was invested. So the first time you see Arwen and Aragorn together in the movies, which isn't actually what happens in the books because it's supposed to be an entirely different elf, but we don't have to talk about that. Actually, I enjoy that scene from a storytelling standpoint because the way that they're talking to each other, you know that they deeply care about each other. And then there's that moment where Aragorn just, like, barely grabs her hand on the horse's rein, you know? And it's just, it's good. It's so good. And you're immediately like, these people are in love, and I love them. And then she rides off, and it cuts back to Aragorn's face just being like, oh my goodness. I just sent the love of my life on this journey with all the Nazgul chasing after her, but, like, it needed to happen because Frodo needs to get out of here. And, like, ugh, so much pressure. Yeah, and you can read all of that on his face, and it's just, I love it. You're immediately invested in their relationship, and then they get more scenes together along the way, which makes them cute and adorable, and you're like, yep, I ship this. And with Bronwyn and Arondir, they weren't together enough, and when they were together, they were just sort of silently staring at each other. I'm not invested, you guys. I'm not. I don't ship them. One final thing from the first 2 episodes. Gosh, this is going to be a very long review. I apologize. Anyway, yeah, the final thing is that Galadriel in The Rings of Power is presented as this, like, rebellious, petulant, like, YA protagonist. Which I don't love for 2 reasons. In The Rings of Power specifically, I don't think they're doing well with it because they want her to be the main character, but at the same time they make everything very easy for her. So, like, the snow troll situation that happened very early on in episode 1, snow troll takes out all of these elves, and then Galadriel's just like, psh, done. She doesn't break a sweat. She's not struggling because she's, like, dancing around and spinning her blade, and, like, she's not even a little bit concerned. Which, you know, suggests that she's very powerful and strong, which is great, but you don't want that for your main character. Main characters need to struggle and have to strive after things because that's what makes readers or viewers, like, relate to them and connect to them, and then they're able to go on journeys together. And she's immediately a Mary Sue. Just immediately. She's immediately a Mary Sue. And then, like, from a Tolkien standpoint, she's not supposed to be the YA protagonist. She's not a young, rebellious person. She's like the oldest elf in Middle-earth that people are all coming to because she's so wise or whatever, you know? So it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. moving on to episode 3. Early on in the episode, we arrive in Numenor, which got weird immediately. When she first arrives, and she seems slightly confused. It turned out later that she did know where they were and what was happening. But when she first arrived, she seemed slightly confused, and I was like, this place was established early in the Second Age by Elrond's brother, so, like, you should know what this is. But then it turns out she did. So that was just weird. I think that was their way of, like, introducing the audience to a new place, to be like, yeah, where are we? Oh, it's this place we are well acquainted with. I don't know. I also found it weird that there was immediately hostility with Galadriel there. Like, she walks onto the island, and everyone's like, oh no, is that an elf? And then they take her in to see the queen and all the nobles, and they're like, oh my gosh, it's an elf! And I was like, Numenor and the elves were friendly. They got along until the end and the downfall. The end and the downfall and all of that happened after Sauron was there and, like, being sneaky or whatever, which happens after the Rings of Power situation, not before it. So that's confusing me. I feel like at this point in the story they should still be buddies, so I don't understand the hostility. As far as I can remember, the elves didn't break faith with, or not the elves, Numenor didn't break faith with the elves and the Valar and Eru until later. Like, they were allies against Sauron the first go-around. I swear. I haven't read the source material in years, so I can't really recall any of this. But I swear they, at this point in the story, should still be buddies, because the rings haven't even been made yet. Okay, I did end up looking up a few dates, because it was bugging me while I was watching it, and I kept pausing and just, like, staring at the screen and being like, is this what's supposed to be happening? I don't think this is supposed to be happening. And then I watched more. And it's also bugging me right now as I'm talking about it, so I had to look things up. So what I'm getting online is that Sauron, under disguise, convinces the elves to make the rings around 1500 of the Second Age, and the One Ring is forged shortly after that. Then there's the war with Sauron. The elves fight Sauron, and he's basically dealt with, which is always what happens with him. It's like, oh, we defeated him. Wait, he's back. What happened? Anyway. Somewhere in the 2200s, the Númenóreans break into the faithful who are still friendly with elves, and the loyal, and the greedy, insolent folks who bring about the downfall of the island. Which is, again, after the Rings of Power situation. And nearing the 3000s, the tensions with the elves has risen to a point that they stop using elven names and language in Númenor. And then Elendil is born after that, in the midst of the chaos. And then a couple hundred years later, Sauron ends up a prisoner on Númenor. I think after trying to attack them and failing. I just need to do more research. But then it's all sneaky, like the OG Grima Wormtongue, and it's like, oh, you want to go to Valinor, you should build ships, yeah, whatever. Anyway, and then, yeah, they try to go to Valinor, even though they're not supposed to, and then Eru, God, steps in and, like, changes the entire world. Like, he takes Valinor completely off the map and makes the world round and sinks Númenor beneath the waves. It becomes basically Atlantis to the humans, and, yeah, it's like a whole situation. That I remember. But it's after that, after the downfall of Númenor, that Elendil and the faithful go to Middle-earth and found Gondor and the other kingdom that goes with Gondor that I don't remember. And that's when Sauron causes more trouble, and then the last alliance is formed, and that's what you see in Peter Jackson's prologue. So yes, I was correct in saying that there was the elf fight against Sauron because of the Rings of Power, while Númenor was still allies. And then a couple thousand years later, there's the fight after the downfall of Númenor. So basically, they've just sort of, like, squished several millennia together. Yeah, when I was watching it, I definitely couldn't tell where it was set, but I didn't have enough recollection of the source material to be able to tell why it felt wrong, but I kept pausing, like, every 10 to 15 minutes to be like, is this supposed to, like, when Elendil, like, walked on screen, and I was like, are you supposed to be here? I don't know, which apparently the answer is no, he's not. So yeah, they're definitely squishing several thousand years together, while also skipping things. Like, Galadriel should have her husband Celeborn at this point. and possibly also her daughter. On that subject, I can't decide if there's romantic tension with Halbrand right now. I said that Elrond had this issue in the last review that I did. I swear any man who has screen time with Galadriel, they're like, only did my camera shut off that time, but the battery died, and the camera's very hot. I've been talking too long. Anyway, I feel like every man who's on screen with Galadriel, I feel like they're teasing romance. But I feel it more with Halbrand than Elrond. With Elrond, it might have been my imagination. But with Halbrand, there's like, there are scenes where there's definitely something going on there. Like when he gives her back her dagger and various other scenes. There's something going on there, and I don't like it because she should already be married at this point and possibly have her daughter. So that's just weird. Also, it's another, like, elf-human situation that they're trying to, like, push on you. And once again, the more relationships you build together between elves and humans, the less rare and beautiful Beren and Luthien and Aragorn are. So stop making it commonplace, please. On the subject of Elendil and Galadriel, he kind of, I guess, is supposed to sneak her out of the city when they go off horse riding, because she escaped and then ran into him, and then they go off riding. But, like, we don't see them escaping the city or an explanation of him being, like, you can just let us pass to other guards or whatever. Like, we don't see the exit from the city. They're just suddenly riding horses, which made my brain go, wait a second, how'd they even get out of the city and collect horses? I'm confused. Also, the slow-motion horse riding was an interesting stylistic choice, which I do not understand at all. That was weird. And also, seriously, Galadriel having to sneak around the city at first, but then later she's just wandering around and, like, going to visit Halbrand in his jail cell and whatever. Like, I'm confused. I'm confused. Also, I'm trying to figure out who this random human Halbrand is supposed to be. If he's just a random creation of the show, or if he's meant to be someone. My best guess is maybe the king of, like, the mountain folk who ends up betraying Isildur, and then they become the ghost people that Aragorn brings back to fight, you know. I don't know. I don't remember there being kings in the Southland prior to Gondor. Again, I'm not super well versed in the actual lore. Read the books, maybe don't recall all of them. Definitely don't remember other kings, other than maybe the guy who betrays Isildur and doesn't fight against Sauron, and then they're ghosts, and then they have to come back and fight later. I don't know. That's who I'm thinking he is, or possibly maybe Sauron. Maybe. I'm less sure of that, but I feel like I don't know who Sauron is yet, and we're 3 hours into the show. He should already be present and being all fair and sneaky, and, like, getting them to make the Rings of Power, and then forging the One Ring, and, like, what the show is literally called Rings of Power, and we did not see any of the people invested in building the Rings of Power in episode 3. We weren't with Celeborn or Elrond, or, like, we just didn't even see that at all. I feel like that's the point of the show, the Rings of Power, but we just didn't even bother to tell that storyline at all. We're 3 episodes in, and I feel like there's not a purpose yet. And it doesn't feel like a slow build story, which is what Tolkien, you know, likes to write. It feels like a pointless story. Why are we here? What are we doing? I don't understand. Also, there's 2,000 or 3,000 years of information that we're cramming into, like, a single week. So that's adding to the confusion, but, like, I need there to be a reason and something we're all invested in and fighting for, and I thought it was going to be the Rings of Power situation, but we didn't even visit those people in episode 3. So, I don't know. Also, it started raining. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's raining outside. Random notes just from a storytelling standpoint. I don't understand why the elves who are in bondage in the Southlands with the orcs are speaking common. They're just talking in English when they're, like, forming their plans or whatever. Why aren't they speaking Elvish? I mean, how many orcs actually speak High Elven? The Quenya, or however you say it. I'm not good with names. That just didn't really make any sense to me. Also, from a personal standpoint, I did not feel we'd had enough scenes with Arondir's friend to care that he died. It was sort of like, oh, no, that elf got stabbed. How terrible. This is coming from someone who is incredibly empathetic, and I cry at everything, you guys. I literally cry at everything. I wasn't invested in the characters because we'd had like one scene with him 2 episodes ago. I didn't feel it. I didn't feel the emotion of it. I did not. The elves, like, chain fight scene, though, that was cool. I loved every second of that. It felt like the perfect amount of over-the-top for elves in film. Very reminiscent of Legolas, like, you know, taking a slide down the stairs, or he uses a chain against the troll in the Fellowship of the Ring. Like, it felt like spot on. I loved it. Also, it was just really fun to watch them flip in the air and like snap the chain into Oryx's necks. Like, it was cool. I enjoyed it. One other random thing, when Nori's dad is having some sort of like emotional conversation with his wife Marigold, he starts the conversation off by saying something like, "When I lost Rose, and then I found you," and yada yada. But like, when I lost Rose, and I was like, do we know who Rose is? Have we mentioned Rose before? I don't remember anyone mentioning a Rose before. Is Rose important? Was Rose his previous wife? Was Rose his daughter? Why is he losing Rose? Who's Rose? Like, I couldn't pay attention to the emotional conversation that was happening because I was stuck on Rose. And if this is the first time we're hearing about Rose, and it's supposed to be impactful in some fashion, like, maybe don't wait 3 hours into the story to mention Rose, and also maybe don't try to make her impactful in the very first sentence that you name drop her. Like, I was confused. Not impacted. Also, side note, Nori is absolutely my favorite character. I adore her so much. And she is possibly the only person that I'm actually emotionally invested in. I'm mostly 100% convinced that that stranger is supposed to be Gandalf, or a wizard that they're making you think of Gandalf just so you make the connection to wizard, but like it's basically Gandalf. And because they've smushed so many thousands of years together, it would not be out of the ordinary for the show to bring Gandalf to Middle-earth before he's actually supposed to be in Middle-earth. Although, if the show ends up, which I suspected in episodes 1 and 2, I don't really anymore, but if the show ends up making he's a good wizard, the red herring, and he's actually someone bad, I'll probably throw something. Because it's too... it's too good of a red herring. I'm convinced he's a good guy. Final thoughts. I'm leaning towards I don't like the show. The more I become reacquainted with Tolkien and his lore and his writings, the more obvious how different the show is, and some of the changes I just don't understand and don't love. Some of it could entirely be that they don't have rights to the Silmarillion, so like smushing all those years together, like, I don't know how much is in the appendices. Maybe they have to do that because they don't have access to the Silmarillion. But if that's the case, I'm once again to the point of saying, why are you trying to tell the story if you can't tell the story? So, yeah, the more I am becoming reacquainted with Tolkien, the more it becomes obvious that it's not a good adaptation. And then, Tolkien aside, just from a storytelling standpoint, watching a fantasy show, I don't think it's that great. Like I was talking about, their main character, Galadriel, is presented as a Mary Sue who just doesn't struggle, you know. And sometimes events happen to her, like she gets lost at sea or whatever, but then she's immediately found and safe. So it's like, she's not actually struggling. And the choices that she makes, like killing the snow troll or whatever, like there's no difficulty, no struggle, she's not striving. I'm not invested. Also, we're 3 hours into the story, and I don't feel like we have a villain or a purpose yet. It's supposed to be Sauron, I get that, but he's not present in the 3 hours. 3 hours that we have had yet, so he doesn't feel pressing or like an actual problem. He feels like a vague sort of, yeah, he's probably a problem. Because things are happening that seem like they're connected to him, probably, possibly, maybe. I also feel like just from, like, the standpoint of, like, just watching a fantasy show or whatever, we're 3 hours into the story and I don't feel invested in, like, any of the characters. I kind of like Arondir, but I think a lot of that is because I sympathize with his plight of everyone being like, you don't have emotions, and I'm like, well, maybe he does, I do. I really like Nori. I adore Nori. Nori's the absolute best. But like with the other characters, I'm not invested yet. I don't have emotional connections to them. I don't really care. And again, this is coming from someone who cares deeply about people. Like, I'm borderline an empath, you guys. I feel things that people feel, like, all the time. It's ridiculous. So, the fact that I'm not invested, like, I don't know. I think that says something. Except that I have seen a lot of reactors on YouTube, because I have a weird obsession of watching other people react to shows and movies and things that I enjoy. Anyway, I watch a lot of reactors on YouTube, and a lot of them are watching The Rings of Power. Oh, hello. Calm down, light bulb. Anyway, a lot of them are watching The Rings of Power. Most of them are enjoying it. Most of them also don't have Tolkien knowledge clouding their judgment. So, my dislike could entirely be related to the fact that I'm a Tolkien fan. And, like, if I was just watching a fantasy show, I might enjoy it. I don't know. But I somehow doubt it, because I'm not super invested in the characters or the story, and, like, I don't know. So, like, random example. When I randomly discovered The Witcher show with Henry Cavill a couple of years ago, it was, like, Christmas, and I was scrolling Netflix, and I saw it, and was like, oh, fantasy show, and so I started watching it. I binged the entire the entire season in one night. I was just, whoop, watched the whole thing. I was immediately invested and cared about the characters and was like, what is happening? I don't feel like I would feel that way about The Rings of Power, even if I wasn't a Tolkien nerd. Like, I feel like I'd watch it and be like, well, this is kind of interesting and very slow. So, that's what I have on that. Also, there's storytelling aspects that just don't make sense to me. Like, Galadriel being a prisoner, and we see her trying to, like, escape and get away from her guards in Numenor, and then immediately after that she's just wandering around free and no one's questioning her, and there's a gap there. Like, either explain that she's still sneaking around, or explain that Elendil somehow convinced the guards not to come after. Like, there needs to be an explanation there, because you can't have her sneaking around and then also wandering around freely. That doesn't make sense. There's some things like that that make me just feel like the show isn't that well written, to be honest. And then on top of that, there's the Tolkien stuff of, like, what time period are we even trying to be in right now? So yeah, I'm not loving the show. I do love Nori, though. I really love Nori. On a final note or two, the CGI seems all over the place. There's, like, these big, beautiful cities and whatever, and then there's fight scenes with monsters that don't look great. And to be fair, like, in the original trilogy, the CGI wasn't great either. Like, the wargs looked fake. But also, that was 20 some odd years ago, and they didn't have the technology. I feel like we have technology now to actually make this not look so fake. And also, I've heard rumors that this is, like, the most expensive TV show ever made. So that makes me feel like it's Amazon. You have the money to, like, actually make this look interesting. The warg just looked fake. I was not invested in, like, the terrifying aspect of the elves being attacked by this warg, because I was like, he looks fake. And when he was biting people and the fake blood was splurting or whatever, like, it also looked fake. The whole thing looked fake. I was not scared or invested in the dying people. I was like, this looks like a poorly made video game or something. Like, I was not impressed. But then also on that note, the gore level is completely all over the place and inconsistent. Like, sometimes there is no, like, I don't know, blood or, like, violence at all, and then sometimes it's like, oh no, this is gonna be crazy and you're gonna see everything. Like, it feels ridiculously inconsistent to me. It's pick one or the other, you guys. Are we having PG fights, or are we having, like, gory, violent ones? Just pick one. I'd say I don't hate the show yet. Yet. Yeah, but I'm definitely not in love with it. And the more that I remember or become acquainted with Tolkien's lore, the more I'm like, yeah, this is wrong. But then also, aside from Tolkien, I do feel like there are just aspects of the show itself that just aren't written well or explained well, and that just bugs me from a storytelling standpoint, so I'm not in love. I'll probably keep watching it, because it's sort of like it's the train wreck and you just can't look away. But also I do want to know what happens to Nori, so There's that. Also, there's the fact, like I said, I watch a lot of reactors on YouTube who are enjoying it, and I'm like, if they're enjoying it, like, maybe there's something worth watching here. Maybe there is, and I'm just missing it. So, I'm gonna try and keep watching it. I don't know, at some point we might give up, but I'm not tapping out yet. There you are. I don't know how I'm gonna cut this down. This is like an hour-long rant. It's fine.